Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to make your sewing perfect. And before we get too deeply into this, my answer in how to make your sewing perfect is that you're never going to make your sewing perfect. I thought I should say that straight up because otherwise you may feel misled. So my ultimate message is that it's never going to happen. There is no such thing as perfect sewing, in my opinion. But I want to talk about perfectionism in sewing, and how we can make ourselves feel much more positive about stuff we make if that's something that you need. And these are things that I know from my professional practice as a therapist, but also from my human experience as a sewist. So I'm coming from it as a human and as a therapist. I wanted to give a shout out to the Specky seamstress Laura because she inspired me to make this video. There's been an Instagram challenge going along during September, and there's been prompts every day to post something each day in September. And there was a prompt a few days ago. I'm filming on the 21st of September, and there was a prompt a few days ago that was, what is your best sewing tip? I should say I've made a few notes, so I'm looking at my phone now and then. And Laura's best sewing tip is a most excellent tip, which was, it doesn't have to be perfect to be wearable. And I wanted to raise my hands and say, hallelujah, absolutely, agree with you so much. And of course I commented to let her know that. But it really set the cogs of my brain working. And of course that tip's not exclusively Laura's. Other people have said it too. It's absolutely probably the best sewing wisdom you're ever going to hear. It doesn't have to be perfect to be wearable. But what it set me to thinking about was how much I hear, and in my practice we sometimes strive for this thing called perfection, or we're always looking at the mistakes that we make in our sewing, and it can really get in the way of the enjoyment of something that for most of us is supposed to be a hobby. It's supposed to be fun. So I thought I would wade in and just give you my view on how you can make your sewing more perfect. So the first way, and actually the only way you can make your sewing perfect, is to not do any. That's the only way your sewing is going to be perfect, is to never sew. Because the sewing that we imagine, the sewing that we procrastinate about, the sewing that we plan, the sewing that we dream about, that's always perfect because it doesn't have the difficulty of reality intervening. And so those of us who do tend to find buying patterns and buying fabric somehow much more attractive than actually doing the sewing, that is sometimes why. It's not always why. Sometimes it's because buying patterns and fabric are fun. And the planning phase is also a really fun and engrossing phase. So I'm not saying that's not the case, but I wonder if you find that you love to think about sewing, but the experience is never what you want it to be. Is that why? Is it because the only way you get perfect sewing, and this is true for any of us, the only perfect sewing there is in the universe, in my view, is the stuff we imagine and not the stuff that we actually do. So if you just want perfection, then don't sew and just imagine that you sew and you'll be fine. If you would like to actually sew, then my next tip is actually sew. And that's how you get perfect sewing. Because the sewing that you imagine might be perfect, but it doesn't actually exist. So the way to get this perfect thing called sewing, the way to get sewing is to just sew something. Because done is better than not done. Existing is better than not existing. And what I wanted to say here was that remember that we all have a different level, that if this thing called perfect did exist, would be our own perfect. Our own best work is a different level. And what perfect is day by day will differ. So when you started to sew, or maybe you were really right at the start of your journey, what is the best you can do then or now is different to what the best you can do is a few days after that, a few weeks after that, a few months after that, a few years after that. Or equally, if you have a break or if you have an illness, then you may feel like you've gone backwards. But what is somehow the best that you can do and what will satisfy you is never going to be the same on every day. It's always going to be different. What feels like really good work is affected by our emotions, it's affected by the thing we sewed last, it's affected by the thing we last saw being sewn on YouTube or on Instagram, which is a really poisonous thing to do because, yeah, don't compare yourself to us on screen or people on Instagram. Do what you want to do, because we all put our best foot forwards, even when, like me, we also strive to be really real. One thing I promise myself I never do on this channel is give you a list of my mistakes. I will tell you when I've had difficulties, but what I mean is I'm not going to turn a thing inside out and say, look at this seam, I went wonky here, I slightly missed it here. So you will hear the real story, but equally you're not going to hear the sort of reams of criticism that may be going on in your own head that you know about your own garments. So what I'm saying is, external comparison is not a route to feeling good about your own work for most people. And the other thing is that my perfect is probably not your perfect. And my good enough might be your perfect, and vice versa. So my perfect is somebody else's not good enough, and my only good enough is somebody else's perfect, because we're all at different parts of our journey, and we're all at different stages of this experience. So yeah, if you want to be perfect at sewing, then you should do some sewing. The third thing, my third tip, is this is not the last thing you're ever going to sew, I assume. So this thing that you're working on, or this next thing that you're planning to work on, is not the last thing you're ever going to make. It's not a one shot, one go, one time only event. You can sew hundreds, thousands of things in a lifetime, or you can sew 5, but this one doesn't have to be the last one. It's not the only one. It's not the thing that everything hangs on. So just remember that when you're sewing something, that it leads me on to my last point. My fourth top tip about getting perfect at sewing is that we often call it the practice of sewing. And I want you to think about that word, the practice of sewing. So what we are doing is practicing. And here I want to, if I can, insert a tiny little clip of a video of my son Felix when he was really little. I think he was about 1, maybe just before 1, trying to build a tower. Now what you'll see in this video is that he's building the most perfect tower ever, because I'm his mum. But no, you'll see, he's building, it falls down, he's not bothered. He does it again, it falls down, he's not bothered. He makes an amazing tall tower, and he's as excited about that as he is about any of it, because he's enjoying the process. And I think we forget how children learn, and we pollute the process as adults, because when children learn, what they do is they don't even think about the word failure unless we've taught them to. They just, it going wrong is entirely part of the process. The tower falling down is entirely part of the process. So it going wrong isn't even it going wrong, it's just part of it. I did it wrong that time, so I'll do it again. That's how it goes. Isn't that how it works? And the truth is, yeah. So Felix, or any child at age 1, has a whole lot more wisdom than a lot of us have as adults about the learning process, because failure is the point of learning. If you're not going wrong, you're not learning. And it's absolutely fine to sew without learning. It's absolutely fine to sew within your comfort zone. That's not a problem. Make the same thing all the time. That is not a problem. I'm not here to tell you what you should sew or how you should sew. But if you are doing a project that extends your skills, then you're going to fail, in the sense that there are going to be things that maybe don't go right. And that is the point of doing it. That is wholly part of the process. And we need to try and do that magical thing of recapturing the fact that we embrace that as much as we embrace the massive, very impressive tower that we've built, or the beautiful garment that we've sewn. The final thing I want to say on the practice of sewing is the line that is perfect for you moves further and further away as your skills expand. So if Felix was building a tower now, he's 9, he's probably going to be more demanding of himself and his skills than he was when he was 1. So maybe he'll want it to be straighter, maybe he'll want to build 5 towers, maybe he'll want it to be taller or built out of something else. And that's the equivalent of us wanting to use trickier fabrics or make more complicated garments or use different seam finishes or whatever else it is that you would like to add to your repertoire. That's fine, but give yourself some credit that that is what you've done. You have gone past the age of being 1 and now you're at the age of being 9 in my metaphor, and so everything's better. So the last thing I wanted to say about perfectionism, and just a word of warning here, this is a bit more about psychology, so if you're feeling tender then feel free to turn off, but perfectionism is not about sewing, it's about you. Whether something is perfect or not is not about how good the sewing is, it's about you. So for some of us, nothing is ever going to feel perfect, and that is not because your sewing will never be great. It's because of what we've learnt about how we feel about our own work and things like that. There are other wonderfully gifted people who can sew anything, any old how, love it, be fine with it, totally great, because they're at the other end of the spectrum. And then there's everyone else is somewhere in the middle, where what is good and what is bad is as much influenced by how they feel about their own work and about how they feel about stuff like that as it is about their sewing. So I hope that hasn't been too heavy, and I hope it's given you pause for thought, and I hope that it makes your sewing more perfect without you actually having to change anything about your sewing, because it's already good enough. It's fine. Thanks for watching. Bye.